Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Now we are having our second session on the philosophical charts. And we had an excellent session last month from Bhaskar. He talked to us about the Buddhism and very interestingly brought about his own journey and also that he brought in a lot of points which, at least for people like me who are not aware of the nuances and what it is, and also more importantly, how what principles we can take away, because it's very difficult for us to deep dive into any of the philosophy. But he could bring in good points, which were good takeaways. And we have a recording also with us, so if any of you are interested, we can go back. So today we are having Subra. Uh, Subra is going to take us to Advaita, and I will not take too much of your time. And over to Subra. You have
Yeah,
about
thank you.
30 minutes, Subra. I mean, we can go up
Yeah,
to minutes. After that,
yeah.
it is open for any discussion.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and the two, many of you have woken up very early in the morning as well. I'll also note that it's a very daunting task to cover something like this in 30 minutes, but hopefully at least a very high level overview I can give. And also we have experts here on this in this group who also know a tremendous amount about Advaita. So we'll see, what the comments are, questions are, and so on. So just a little bit about my own particular, bio with regard to this spiritual stuff. I'll simply say that, I grew up, I'm from Andhra Pradesh. There was a small town called Guntakal. That's where my grandfather was. And when I was young, I spent a lot of time there because my dad had a very transferable job. So he used to, I noticed that he used to do these 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., typically, lower middle class family puja from 5 to 7, all kinds of sahasranamams and all that stuff. Then at the age of when I was 9, he took me for 2 weeks to Sivananda Ashramam in Rishikesh. I, of course, didn't understand a damn thing, and they were always talking about some Upanishads or things like that. But one interesting takeaway, one thing he told me at the end of it when we went back was, he said, when you grow up, you make an attempt to understand this. This is the essence of Hinduism. That's how he told me. And then when we went back, another interesting thing happened. He stopped doing those morning puja rituals. He would just do a meditation and then he would sit with his books and he would take notes, write notes. In those days, there was no YouTube, nothing. He had to sit with a Sanskrit dictionary and read stuff and then things like that. So that made some sort of an impression on me. And then as life went along, you see a lot of things happen, unfortunate things that happen. My own brother-in-law, he passed away from cancer. It was very gruesome at the end. And things like, that brought into focus, I used to question myself, this law of karma, which had been taught from the very beginning. Why is it that my brother-in-law was extremely devout, big Shiva Bhakta and all that stuff, but stuff happened like that. So I've seen several such unfortunate incidents, and it shook me up. Then my in-laws introduced me to, there's a Swami Paramarthananda. He has talks on Advaita and so on. And those were the days when it was in CDs. It was not available on the net like now. That was in 98 or so. And then I started with that. Then, gradually, things came onto the net and then Swami Subra and all that. But right now, for the last 4 years or so, I have a guru by the name of Anant Sarma. He teaches from the birthplace of Shankaracharya in Kerala, place called Velayanadu. That's where he teaches from. So we have about 2 classes every week, 1.5 hours each. And he teaches Upanishads and so on. That has sort of been my journey in this. And then so I'll from that go to the next slide. And basic questions of philosophy, right? These are the sort of, I try to frame it in a basic framework which applies to all philosophies and all religions and all kinds of quests. One question is, who am I? Am I body or mind or soul or jiva or jivatma? Jiva typically is more mind and body, and jivatma refers to soul. So who am I? Then the next question is, who is God? Who is, saying we call Paramatma, but in any other context, any other religion also, who is God, and finally, what is universe, what is Jagat. And of course, it's a triangle, right? So you have these three things that form the vertices of a triangle. And what is the relationship between these entities? These are the things that every philosopher, every religion seeks to address. And of course, the underlying context for this comes from the fact that, as I was saying, I'm talking about my personal journey, and everybody here has their own journeys. There is suffering, and we ask ourselves, what is this due to, and how do we liberate ourselves from this suffering? So that's kind of like the framework for every possible philosophy or religion. What are these things? How do they relate to each other? What do I do about suffering and all that stuff? I have been, as I said, studying, mostly from a Vedantic perspective, and it represents Vedanta literally means end of the Vedas, not exactly end, but it means conclusions of the Vedas because they're interspersed. These Vedanta Upanishads are interspersed throughout all the Vedas, so they're considered the final conclusions of the Vedas, and they address this triangle above, and they're codified in what are called Upanishads. One more thing I will say is Vedas are considered apaurushaya, which means beyond or above humans, and for two reasons. One reason given is that they are considered revelations to the rishis and rishinis who were in deep meditation. That's one reason. That second thing also to some extent is they say there is no single person is credited with authorship of the Vedas. There may be people like they say Vyasa compiled them. He is not considered the author. He may have compiled them from various sources into one place, but there is no single authorship. There's no single personality. There's no personality cult even possible, the way things are assembled here, compiled here. So that's like an intro. Now I'll plunge directly into, the fundamental question that Advaita deals with, what is consciousness? Okay. And here I just quoted two verses. I'm not going to go through every verse and every word in that and all that stuff, but basically I bring this up because Kena Upanishads is one of the, shall we say, easier Upanishads. Typically, when one starts on this, it is the first one to study. It's a good intro type of Upanishad, and it straight away plunges into the main question. It's a sort of, you can think of it, the first verse is a question being asked by the student. And, this Kena means what? It comes from that Kena Upanishad does not refer to anybody's name. It basically says, by whom willed and directed does the mind work? By whose will do men speak? What intelligence directs the ear, eye and the ear, and things like that. So basically, strotram means, hearing, So how do we hear? How do we speak? What force, what principle enables us to do all those things? That's a question that the student asks. That's how it begins. And the famous line, the verse from second two, many may have heard, it says, Srotasya Srotram. It means the principle that enables us to hear, that it's called the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, or the tongue of the tongue, life of the life. So they say, for us, consciousness is fundamental and separate from mind and body. So there's something called Atma, which enables us to do all of these things. It illumines the mind, body, ear, eye, speech, and everything else. And that's what is called Atma. And Atma is the real you. That's what this particular verse says. The wise realize this truth and become immortal. The truth that Atma is the real you. It's not just the body and the mind. Atma is what enables everything to function, all of us to function. I noticed that in Amazon, there's a book called Eye of the Eye. This guy, David Hawkins, writes about these kinds of issues, and he seems to have borrowed, in some sense, from this verse. He talks about Upanishads also in the book. So I just showed it as a possible reference. So now, so I start. So what are the fundamental principles of Advaita, right? First, as I said, it illumines mind and body. And Atma is eternal. It has neither birth nor death. I think you may have heard even Bhagavad Gita, the Najayate Mriyate, that's sloka number 2.20. It basically says that, it has no birth, no death. It does not get wet in the rain. It does not, burn in the fire and all those attributes it gives. It's eternal. Atma is consciousness. The very same Atma is in all of us. It's in all of everybody. It's not just in humans, it's in all animals. I think there was some question about how we treat animals differently. No, Atma is everywhere, it's in everything, it's everywhere. The key in the Upanishads, there are these things called Mahavakyas. There are, they sort of summarize everything. And this Tattvam Asi is one of the Mahavakyas, which basically says, you are that which you seek, right? We are all seeking something outside of us. And what this says is actually your true nature is Atma, and that is what you are seeking outside, but actually it is you know. And then, of course, the other principle is there's the wheel of ignorance, right? All this Maya prevents us from recognizing our true nature, right? I mean, the analogy in Mandukya Karika, the analogy is Gaudapada says it's like 1,000-watt light, and let's say you put a very thick black rug on top of it. You can't see the light, right? And you don't know that there is a light also. So that is that wheel of ignorance, that Maya, the world we live in. We are distracted all the time from all our problems, but we don't focus inside. So now when you pull that rug out, then the true nature shines through brilliantly. So that's like 1,000-watt, a million-watt bulb or so on. So those are all the principles. I'll continue, with the principles. I'll sort of talk a little bit about the practice and so on. So continuing with the principles of Advaita, right? Liberation, what does liberation mean? Liberation means we have to realize that our true nature is Atma. That itself is liberation. Another interesting point is there is no need to wait for a different time, after, for example, after death, and a different space, like heaven or, typically, we think of it as, yeah, in some other time, in some other space, you can liberate, or, things like that. Here it's no, it
Yeah.
says it's true here and now. You are Atma. And if you realize it here and now, while living, you can get liberated. This is sort of probably a unique point of view, which says it's all here and now. There is no need to wait for some other time and some other space. Atma is also considered, Sat. You may have heard the name, Atma is Sachidananda. It basically means existence is Sat, consciousness is Chit, and it is also ultimate bliss. The idea is that when you liberate, when you realize, there actually it results in, ultimate bliss. Then you are no longer concerned about any of the suffering and the problems and all that stuff. Another very important point is Atma is not an object. A lot of times people have this thing that, oh, I'm looking for something, I'm looking for this place or, some other place. It's not an object at all. It's not like an ice cream, that's available for the senses to enjoy. It's not a vision. It's not like, some people say, I have this vision, I had that vision. It's not any of those things. It is the subject. It is you, the subject. See, this is a category problem, People, don't understand, typically they understand the difference between object and subject. It is you. The real you is the subject is you. You are not an object. So that's another important point I wanted to make. And of course, the final, in the case of Advaita, it basically says Atma is identically equal to Paramatma. So basically, when we say our own soul, whatever you want to call it, and Paramatma is God, it's one and the same, identically equal. In fact, I remember reading that, Schrodinger, eventually, when he started to give, all these lectures and all that, he became famous. He would end each of his seminars with this equation, Atma equal to Paramatma. So he had also sort of had dabbled in Upanishads and so on. Schopenhauer has written books about the Upanishads, Atma equal to Paramatma. Many Western philosophers have had access to Upanishads, have written about it. So continuing, then remember I said the triangle. There is, God, yourself, the individual, and also the universe. From the basic premises or the principles of Advaita, the universe is not real in the sense that it is only apparent. They don't deny that you are having an experience. We all have experiences. We are having those experiences, but those experiences are not considered absolutely real. The example is the following. Ramana Maharshi uses this analogy of screen and movie. So what he says is the screen is your Atma on which everything plays out. All the everything, all the transactions, everything appear on this screen. The movie is a projection onto the screen. See, the only issue is when we grow up, we are already in the middle of the movie and we think that is the real thing. We don't realize that what makes everything possible is the screen. So that's the analogy that Ramana Maharshi used when he was writing his books. And of course, I realized that analogies only go so far. But that is the one of the central themes of Advaita is the universe is not real. It's a projection onto Atma. The other thing is Atma does not really get affected by transactions. It is avyavaharyam, they call it. And it is also indescribable. The reason they say it's indescribable is it's beyond space, time, and causality. If you start giving it attributes, if you say this adjective, that adjective, that adjective, then in some sense it limits it. So that's why they keep saying it's attributeless. It's very difficult to describe it in words. That's the reason why they call it attributeless. And so effectively, this whole question that we started out with, what is this triangle? What is the relationship between, myself, Paramatma, the God entity, and the universe? It effectively reduces to a point. In Advaita, it means non-dual. There is only one entity. And that one entity is Atma or Brahman, whatever you want to call it. Atma is usually the individual soul. Brahman is the Paramatma, but they're one and the same. There is no difference between the two. And then, of course, in Hinduism, we are taught Bhagavad Gita and all that stuff. We start with, when we are younger, with karma. You have to do all the good deeds. You have to work hard. You have to do this in a spirit of service, without being selfish and all that. And then there's bhakti. You also, do perform pujas, devotion, and all that. The purpose of those two things are to purify the mind, and then eventually you have to actually go to Jnana Yoga. And that's where this knowledge is given to you in the form of Upanishads and so on. And then you have to realize your true nature, and that's what is called realization, and that's called Jnana Yoga. So the role of karma and bhakti is to purify the mind as preparation for this stage. Then I'll give you, you've probably seen, you've heard of Mandukya Upanishad also. It is the smallest of the Upanishads. It has only 12 verses. Okay. Some lines are some of them are 2 lines, some of them are 4. So even if you assume 48 lines, right? It's extremely small, very difficult to understand, and extremely cryptic. Of all the Upanishadic literature, people will say that this is the most difficult Upanishad to understand, in fact, in Kishkinda Kanda in Ramayana, one place Hanuman asks Sri Rama, what should I do for my enlightenment? And Sri Rama actually tells him, you can study all these different 108 Upanishads, or you can go and study Mandukya Upanishad. And he tells him, in Ramayana itself, he tells him, this was written by our ancestors thousands of years ago, and you should go and study this. So these Upanishads are also, very old, thousands of years old. So here, what they do is they take a different approach. In Kena Upanishad, it's a student-teacher dialogue. It's very interesting in its own, in Kena Upanishad, it goes as a dialogue between students and teachers. After some time, the teacher poses a quiz. He asks them, did you understand this? Did you understand that? And then they have some students answer it very brilliantly, they understand it. And then he says, oh, you can now leave. You at least got what I'm saying. Now you go and practice. There's a set of students who say, I don't understand it. Can you help me? Then he tells you in the form of a story. See, that's the other thing to realize is a lot of the Puranas and all those things are told as stories to reveal certain philosophical points. Much of the time, we get lost in the stories, as opposed to looking at the finer philosophical point. So that's Kena Upanishad is like a class. You start, you explain, the brilliant students get it, then some don't, then he explains it like a story, some don't get it even then. Then he says, oh, you go back to doing karma and bhakti, and when you're ready, you come back. So it's like a classroom. Whereas in Mandukya Upanishad, it's very abstract. It says, it analyzes the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states in tremendous amount of detail.
I'm listening
So,
to
for
it.
example, in the dream world, you are interacting with others, you conduct all kinds of transactions. They seem very real, And then upon waking, you realize, oh, it's not real. It was only a dream. In fact, in Mandukya Upanishad, the waking state is also likened to dream state. They say that eventually when you realize you are Atma, then you effectively step out of the waking world and realize the whole waking world is also an illusion. So there's, while it's only 12 verses, each word in the Upanishad, there are hundreds of pages of commentary. I remember that when I studied Mandukya Upanishad, it took nearly 1.5 years of spending at least 5 hours each week, to get to the bottom of it, to understand it. There is a commentary on Mandukya Karika by Gaudapadacharya, who is supposedly Shankaracharya's teacher's teacher, and it's fantastic. It's a lot of beautiful logic. I think people here, Shiva, and probably many of you, Devi, all of you who have read this, probably appreciate. I'll give you some quick example of the kinds of logic you see in these things, right? I mean, uh, uh, for example, there is this thing called Atma is eternal, has neither birth nor death, right? So I'll give you, when we were studying Kathopanishad, this comes up in Kathopanishad. So what is the argument? What is the logic when I say that, right? So simple, I'll go through this particular one. Each of them will take hours to do, but this particular one, I'll just very quickly go through this. Suppose, you say, Atma, no, it is not eternal. It has a finite, it was born at some time and it will die at some time, let's say. Assume that. So the proof is by contradiction. So assume it has a certain time of birth. Now, when we say time of birth, think about ourselves, right? How do we say I was born on such and such a time and such a day? That's because our mother and father told us that you didn't exist before such and such a time and date, and then you came into existence on such a time and date. That's what they say. Now, let's assume that Atma had a specific point in time where it was born, right? That also means when it was born at a certain time, it means there is something called prior non-existence. It's called prag abhava, which means prior to that point in time, Atma did not exist. Right? That's what it means to say that it came into existence at a certain specific time. Okay, so it was not in existence before that. Now the question that they ask is, okay, it was not in existence at that time, but then which conscious agent can say it was not in existence at that time? For example, our parents told us you were not in existence at that time, you came into existence. So they were conscious agents, people with consciousness who said that. So the same question applies here. So you say, oh, it was not in existence before that. Which conscious agent will tell you that it was not in existence? Suppose there is such a conscious agent. Then it means that's a second conscious agent. It cannot be a part of the first one because you said the first one was not in existence. So now if it's a second conscious agent, you have to ask the very same questions of it, about it. When was it in existence? So you can do this as an infinite regression. It never ends. So that is one of the proofs that they give, to say one of the logical arguments they give to say that it's eternal. And you'll find that, tremendous amount of thought has been given to it. There's something called Brahma Sutras. Brahma Sutras are just logic. So they get into all of these fine points, and for the hyper logicians in our class, you might find that very interesting. But a lot of tremendous amount of thought has been given to it. That I just wanted to show you that, throw that out as an example. So after this, what I wanted to say was Mandukya Upanishad. Okay, so this we did. Practice. Okay, how do we practice any of this stuff, and how do we go about this? So there are clear guidelines. They say first step is Shravanam, which means you listen to a guru or you participate in a satsang, which means a group of people like yourself interested in these things. You get together, one person knows this, one person knows something else, you get together in a discussion. So listening is the first step. The second one is Mananam, which means, you reflect, you clear your doubts. Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? All the logical stuff that you have to go through, and eventually clear your doubts and you assimilate them. It becomes integral to you. You internalize it. And then, of course, the third one is internalizing is not enough. You have to abide in it. You have to realize it. You have to abide in that, that I am actually Atma. So that is called Nididhyasana, and they have prescribed what they call Vedantic meditations. Mandukya has its own version. So they describe exactly what you need to do in these meditations. And what I will say is, you cannot think of these as linear processes. It doesn't not like, I finish Shravanam, then I go to Mananam. It's kind of iterative, right? You do all of these things kind of simultaneously. You have doubts, you go back, talk to somebody else, clear the doubts. You also do your meditation. So this is the practice in Aparokshanubhuti. Shankaracharya devotes a lot of time to how to practice these things, Okay. And then, of course, there's another thing they call it eligibility, which means that before you get to this stage of trying to figure out, all this Atma and self-realization, all that, what are the kind of steps before that? What are, qualifying steps? So you have to have some, viveka, questioning attitude and all that. Then vairagya, which means dispassion. You're not, lost all the time in your family or samsara issues, so you can't really focus on these things. Then there are a lot of other things. There are sixfold virtues. There should be an intense longing for liberation. So the reason I mentioned that is all of these qualities are to some extent, you've heard about the eight, the eightfold path in Buddhism and all that. They're very similar in that respect. In fact, I wanted to state that here also. So, what are the commonalities and differences? The underlying philosophy, there is suffering, and we want a liberation. Liberation from suffering is common to both Advaita, for example, and Buddhism also. Then they have these four noble truths and the eightfold path. There are equivalences, which says, these are the kinds of things that you need to do in order to get to this point. Then the main fundamental difference between Buddhism and Vedanta is Buddhism holds that the ultimate reality is shunya, or void, or nothing. Whereas Vedanta holds the exact opposite. It says it's Purnam, or infinity. It is God, or whatever you want to call it, Atma, Brahman. Okay. And I would say I've seen, there are, as I said, hyper logicians on both sides, and then all kinds of logical weapons are used on both sides and so on. Uh, Advaita says Brahman Atma is pure awareness, basically pure consciousness, pure awareness. There's a sect of Buddhists called Shentong Buddhists. They're from the Madhyamika sect. Madhyamika is this, I think, comes from Nagarjuna, Chandrakirti, and all those people. I think Bhaskar talked about it last time. And they also eventually conclude that they talk about a clear light of the void. At the end, there has to be some awareness. When somebody says this is Shunya, the question, Shankaracharya will ask is, who is saying that? Who is the subject who says that? There has to be a subject. So then they finally come to this argument, and then they say there's a clear light of the void, which is the final distance between Advaita and Buddhism is not that much, especially as you get to this Shentong Buddhists, So if you want to kind of get a better background on this, there are two talks. One is on Shunyam, one is on Purnam by Sarvapriyananda, each about 1.5 hours or so. I just added these here as references so that, if you, in your own time, you can listen to it and see what he has to say about these things. It's very interesting by itself. And by the way, Swami Sarvapriyananda, I don't know if any of you have heard him. He's not only knows Advaita and Vedas and Vedanta very well, he knows a lot about psychology and comparative psychology, religions, Judaism, Christianity. He he's very good about it. He'll say these are all the common things, and these are one or two small things that may be different, but these are all common. He tries to take this unifying sort of approach, and he knows a lot about all religions and philosophies. Highly recommend him if you have not heard, heard of these things, heard from him before. So that's really what I wanted to say. I wanted to give you a quick overview in about 30 minutes, and then engage in discussion. I'll try to answer. If I cannot answer, we have Shiva here, we have Devi here, a lot of people here who seem to be quite well versed with Advaita also. So with that, Srinivas and all, I thought, I took exactly, I think, about 30 minutes or so, and then we can talk. Then I can tell you references. If you want to join a class or anything, you let me know. There are so many classes these days. In fact, if you want to join this particular class, this Anand Sharma, my guru, happens to be a graduate of IIT Madras. I think he graduated 5 or 6 years before us. He was a professor at the University of Texas, Arlington or something, I heard. And then he went back. Now he teaches from Shankaracharya's birthplace. Very analytical, kind of the kind of stuff that engineers like to listen to. So if you want to listen to his class, I can send you. He's starting a new class on Advaita Makarandam in December. You know, so if you want to join that, so the way I work with him is, so he teaches, and then there's a discussion at the end. Sometimes we ask questions there, and then sometimes upon reflection, I get more questions, and I send to him questions by email. Then I'll say after the class, I got these other questions, and then he responds. He responds back within a week, before the next class itself. He responds, and we carry on this kind of dialogue. So if anybody is interested in joining any of those things, and I was just mentioning this as an example, I'm sure there are plenty of other classes and teachers out there, depending upon your interest. Okay. So with that, let's get into any Q&A type stuff.
Thanks, Subra.
Literally,
I think
yeah.
you have exactly taken 30 minutes. I think it can be as precise as any Qualcomm modem can be. I don't know whether what G you have used for this, but it is definitely very enlightening. I think now what you can do is you can stop the screen share.
Yeah.
And while we open the open session,
Yeah.
you please send all the links and references what you said in our
Yeah, I'll send you
WhatsApp
these
group.
slides. I'll share the slides so you can send it to
Yeah,
anybody.
slides you already shared, so I will put it up. And you please send all the links what you are referred to in the our common group.
Having some difficulty. 1 second. Actually, can you do that too? I have some issue. I'm logged into. Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah, now the session is open, so people can start discussing and.
It was really great listening to Subra. Very thought-provoking and clarifying, to be honest. Now, it's rather difficult to read through some of the text, to be honest, which I've been trying to do from my PhD days, thanks to my interaction with now lamented Professor Kashyap, with whom we used to have a every week class on Upanishad, and we used to discuss fairly frequently on these issues. Now, for example, one of the things which really foxed me was in Brahma Sutra Bhashyas, the first sutra is very straightforward. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Now to the study of Brahman. But Shankara spends about several hundred words this questioning why now. What does that now mean? Now that's kind of mind-boggling. But once you read it, then you realize you need to. The now is not actually the time, but the state of your mind, buddhi, and the consciousness, and that how important is to prepare the ground for the processes to continue. And on the other extreme, you have Gaudapada, who in his Karika second 32 says there is nobody who is seeking liberation.
Na nirodho na chotpatti, na baddho, that's the one you're talking about,
That's right? Yeah.
Na mumukshu, right? He says there is no one in bondage, because that is an extreme Advaitic point of view, right? So he boiling it down to its essence. So just for the sake of others, right? So I'll say that, Gaudapada has written this commentary about Mandukya Upanishad. On each word of that Upanishad, there are, literally hundreds of pages of commentary, Avyapadesham. Or, remember there's a line says, Prapanchopasamam Santam Sivam
Ekatma Pratyacharam, Prapanchopasamam Shivam Shantam, Advaitam Manyante Savigneya.
Yeah. So he spends on each word. Actually, this is very interesting about writing commentary in those days. On each word, he writes literally hundreds of pages of commentary. He'll tell you what is the meaning of that word? Why is it so important there? Why no other word in its place could have made the same sense? It's just unbelievable the amount of research or whatever he did in writing those things. But that's what they do. Everything has a very deep meaning. There's a lot of logic behind it. These things are very cryptic, right? These Upanishads are so cryptic. That's why they tell you no amount of Sanskrit you cannot understand it, because they're so highly cryptic. You need a guru or someone who has really studied this for a long time to do this. But I agree with you, all of these Brahma Sutras and so on, a lot of tremendous amount of thought has been given to it. So, for example, to get into it, right? I think maybe you are a physicist, you probably understand this. Suppose, somebody, graduate school or even some college or something, or even in high school, is asked to study quantum mechanics, right away, without even studying Newtonian physics. Then you'll say, what the hell is this? This doesn't make any sense. Does not comport to my intuition, to my senses, right? So you'll say it's ridiculous. I won't even study it, right? But at a certain stage, after proper preparation and all that, when you study quantum mechanics, and it kind of works, it explains all the experiments. That's how we design our transistors for all these cell phones and all these kinds of things, right? So in that same sense, I would say Upanishads also are very difficult. But if you do the right amount of preparation and with the right attitude, if you look at it, that's what they say. You study this, assume these things, and eventually you'll understand it, right? That's what they say. It's not a question of it looks very weird from the outside. It's so weird that I'm not even going to bother. So I think it's a stage of life, your own particular curiosity, the people who have influenced you. In the case of Devi, it looks like luckily he found this Professor Kashyap, a professor of electrical engineering at Purdue University. I'm a big fan of his technical papers as well as an electrical engineer, and he's written very beautiful books on the Upanishads also. So all those things come together. But I would suggest that if you have the time, definitely take a shot at it, listen to some talks, and then you'll find some intriguing, others not so intriguing, and then you can select which ones you want to dig deeper into.
Okay, others have any questions or any comments?
Yeah, GK, others, I have
Yes.
a question that's kind of comes from what Devi said just now and what Milind put on his chat comment. One of your slides, I think it was slide number 6, that had a comment that kind of triggered some thoughts in me. It said something about impure mind, right? I've always wondered what goes around, comes around, karma and all those things. But if you actually look at day-to-day life, okay?
Yes.
You see that people who do very good things for others, themselves, everything, they don't necessarily have the best of lives. Mm-hmm. While those who do things that one would consider as impure, if you will, actually thrive, right? Now, again, all of this can be thought of as Maya. So probably in that case, my question will become moot. But from a day-to-day practical experience, I have always wondered, and this has gone on for a very long time,
right?
What is it that makes something right or wrong? Who judges it in a Advaitic sense? What causes something to be considered right or wrong? And in this case, pure, impure, which is, I think of as just a alternate terminology, right? So when I look at life, I look at day-to-day politics, I look at day-to-day life, my own experiences in life. I just wonder, what is right, what is wrong, what is pure?
Subra, you want to revert to that point, what MV is saying?
So I am. I'm going to talk to that point. Okay. So basically, that is what set me on this course also. I think I said this, MB, at the very beginning. I saw that myself. There are people who are very good people, who have helped everyone else a lot. They're very devout and all that. And they've had a very rough life. And conversely, I have met people, I was in startups and all that, people who were, no honesty whatsoever, and then did all kinds of things, destroyed other people's lives. And they've done extremely well in life. And I know them still. They are doing extremely well even now. And in fact, I do believe with MV, I even believe that justice delayed is justice denied. If somebody says, a million years from now in some other, Janma or something like that, this guy is going to suffer, it is not very appealing to me. That is what set me on this course, right? So MV, the answer to that question from the Advaitic perspective is they basically say that you yourself said it, right? Who is suffering? Who is suffering? That's a fundamental question. Who are you? And who is suffering, right? The real you is not suffering. What is suffering is probably your body, mind, your ego, and other kinds of things like that. So they try to separate the real world issues from the true Vedantic issues. That's how they would say it. In fact, I'll go so far as to say, people don't like my saying that, but in a purely, strictly Advaitic perspective, right? When they say this is a Maya, this is an illusion, the real world is an illusion and all that stuff. In fact, this whole karma also sort of breaks down in that sense. In other words, if they're saying this Janma itself is an illusion, what is the point in talking about the next Janma and the next Janma, right? So from a purely Advaitic point of view, they sort of rise beyond and above this, But definitely from a practical ethics and that point of view, where you talk about karma yoga and all that stuff, the prescription is, if you don't do good things now, somewhere or the other, you'll suffer.
See, but isn't that a kind of ignoring that you have a Janma? Even though you call it an illusion, you still have a Janma, and you are actually seeing in some ways what should be considered right and wrong being tilted on its head, right? That's what has always bothered me about, the whole concept of what goes around comes around. Yes, it does happen to some extent, but it is more often than not, you don't see that in this life. So for the average person, when you go and project a philosophy that says you have to be above that, and especially those who not only have had a personally bad life, but for people who they love have had a rough time. I don't want to go into personal, but you yourself commented about your brother-in-law having a very difficult final days, because I went through exactly that experience with my brother-in-law. He was an absolutely wonderful man, and it was very, very difficult, right? So I ask, are we looking at the wrong side of the tube, if you will, kaleidoscope? And actually, we should be focusing more on the current Janma, not on liberation and so on, but how to make things better in this Janma. Not for just oneself, but for everybody, right?
MV, if I can pipe in a bit.
Go ahead.
The problem arises because we are comparing states. How do we come to the conclusion someone is better, someone is worse, someone is suffering, someone is not suffering? These are all dyads. You take away one, the concept of the other vanishes. If there is no suffering, there is no pleasure. If there is no pleasure, there is no suffering. So this dvandva, according to Advaita, as I understand it, with my very limited understanding, is basically you look upon all these as excitation superimposed on the unmoving substratum. And your sadhana is to subdue these excitation. That's the way I understand it. Whether this Janma or not, it's not relevant. It is try to understand that this does not really affect me. It affects only my body. That distinction,
MV, I think that you also put a very valid question. I think we should continue the debate in our group. I think it's a very deep implications, but I think both Subra and Devi has given a good perspective from Advaita perspective. Now, whether that really meets your answer or not, that is a debatable thing that we can continue. Shiva is a question. I think we'll move on to that.
I'm addressing what ME has raised. It's not the difference between right and wrong. The mind, I'll begin by describing the trunk of an elephant. An elephant can use its trunk to pull out a massive tree and can also pick up a small needle on the ground. It has both capacity. Similar to that, our mind has the capability to see gross things, analyze, understand, and to see the subtle. What we need is decluttering the thoughts which comes on its own into the mind space. So the purity of mind should be looked at the ability of minimized thoughts or the flow of the other thoughts, not the right or wrong, no reference to this is good, this is bad, none of that. A clean, pure mind is one which is calm enough to observe the subtle things. When we are moving towards Atma, it is when the mind is not fluctuating, it is not disturbing. So I would present it, I would observe it this way, that when it says no impure mind, it means the random flow of thoughts slowing down. Devoid of thought is a pure mind. Thank you.
I will just observe, a practical tip for people who practice meditation here, right? I think many of you are probably practicing meditation in some form or another. One thing I have found very useful, and this was after I started, these studies of the Upanishads and all that, that I find extremely useful is when you are meditating, after some amount of time, certainly thoughts will appear and disappear, right? That's quite common to meditation. The thing that I found very useful is to label it. For example, when a thought comes, I will immediately say, this is an ego thought. And in fact, believe me, 9 out of 10 times most they are like ego thoughts. In some fashion, it is trying to show that you are better than somebody else, or you this or that, and so on. So I call them ego thoughts. And sometimes it can be a random thing, like maybe it goes to cricket or movie or something. I call that an entertainment thought. So what I found was once I started labeling them, it was much easier to get over it and move out of it very quickly. Something comes and say, oh, this is an ego thought. And as you find with time, you're actually trying to reduce these ego-related thoughts also. So just a practical tip. But going back to Shiva, he was talking about, decluttering the mind for purification. However, going back to MB's fundamental question about, suffering, and you may be a nice person, you may be suffering, then the real answer that Ramana Maharshi gives is, you have to ask yourself, who is suffering? Who am I? Is the real me suffering, or is this just the body and the mind? Things like that always come up. Ramana Maharshi had cancer. He had cancer. So did Ramakrishna Paramahamsa had cancer of the throat. Right? These people have lived under extremely, it's one thing to say, I can be separate from my body and mind when everything is fine. Right? It is quite another when you are dying of cancer to continue the thought process and to remain in a state of bliss. And that's what I have read, and I have, and I believe, for me, all these people are like gods, realized souls. Go ahead, Shiva.
And both those saints you quoted lived that life till the very end. As by the testimony of the nearest disciples and people who were witnessing that. And the same is true of the great Swami Shivananda, whose ashram you visited in Rishikesh.
Yeah.
Like I've heard so many, first-hand personal assistant recount telling the Mahasamadhi of Swami Shivananda and how he was, not once did he, how shall I say, leave their state of Satchidananda.
And bliss.
So thank you so much. I tell you, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you guys, because whatever topic you take, you distill it so beautifully.
Chaiti has got a question, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
So GK, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm just a lay person who understands this, not deep into it. But MV's question also makes you think that this other notion of that place and this place, what you mentioned before, which is heaven, we are here and you want to go to heaven. So there are certain religions, Christianity, for example, that will say, yeah, you should do good here and you should be a good person here so that you can go there. And it seems to be a logic to fix that behavior problem, right? And one of our classmates was in the session last time, and I saw only the recording, all fabulous, by the way. So thanks to all of you. I had this reaction, in some sense, all of sort of Vedanta in a way sounds like the theory It's the science, but you need the technology. We are all technologists. We all build stuff, right? So there is the science behind it. There's a theory behind it, but then there is the technological implementation aspect, and that seems to, yeah.
Right. That's a good point. So what you're saying is where it says if you do good, you go to heaven is an immediate incentive to change your behavior, right? That's your point. To some extent in Hinduism, the law of karma says similar things. It says if you do good now, in your next janma, you'll have an even better time and so on. So, but yeah, those are all potential incentives. Yes, Raju.
Yeah, so I also have thought just like what Chaitanya said. But when I look at the history of the world, right, a great deal of, I don't know what to call it, activity has been done by the so-called Christian nations of Europe, imperialism, colonialism, World War, Holocaust, everything. So how do you put these two together? And the whole thing about karma seems to break down for me when I look at all these things. I recently watched a movie that I saw in IIT, Agire, the Wrath of God. When I saw it, it was so shocking. I almost completely forgot that movie, but it showed how these people, they had a priest also with them on the raft in that movie. And they didn't treat native people very well. So
This is
somehow
Klaus
there is
Kinski.
conflict.
What's that movie?
Sorry?
There's an actor called Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, it's a Werner Herzog movie. Yeah. But there is some kind of contradiction in all this. People, just because they follow a religion, or you cannot expect them to be good, or you shouldn't expect them to be not good, whatever you want to say. So when we go into things like what you described in your lesson, right, it removes a lot of these things and tries to focus on something else, right?
Yeah, that's yes.
And yeah, one more thing is your infinite regression example, right? So where does it converge? Does it converge?
That's
to
why
some...
it's a contradiction, right? That's why you say, "Oh, I assumed, that it was going to be born at a certain time and place," because it can. The argument never ends. They say it's a contradiction. So therefore, it's there forever.
Or does it end in, say, Krishna, and Krishna was always there, and he created time and everything came out of Lord Krishna.
Actually,
if you read Bhagavata Purana, it says things like that, right?
That's true. Yeah, that is true. The only thing I will say is, as I said before, right, in the case of the, Upanishadic treatment, right, what they're saying is this is beyond space and time. And the purpose of the Puranas is to take specific principles and tell them to you as stories.
Okay.
That's what I would say, to form illustrative stories, exactly like you were saying. Practically, MV is also asking, right? They'll tell you, oh, if you did bad things, these bad things happen to you. Those are exemplified in all those stories.
Yeah, and there's always the question of where did the karma start?
Yeah.
What was the starting point of the karma?
Right? That's an excellent question. In fact, that's a very good question. What you asked is very good, right? See, when you say, karma, you get your janma based upon your previous karmas. If you ask yourself the question, go back to the beginning. How did the first time, what janma did you take first time? At that time, there was no previous karma. But on the other hand, if you were given a specific janma, that determined what you could do that time. So you are limited by those capacities. So that's why the law of karma is good at a certain stage in life. But as you move towards Advaita, you sort of say, I'm moving beyond that.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, we have
Just
2 more
wanted
minutes.
To bring that.
So sorry to interject. We have 2 more minutes left. So we have 3 other people, I think, are not yet spoken. In case they want to say something, we are parking the points. I think Raju, Chaiti, MV put in a lot of good points. Yeah. So Kamesh, Namir, you want to take the...
Yeah, hi. Lovely, discussion. So I'm still practicing the Shravanam mode.
Yeah, all of us.
And so anyway, still getting to the reflection side, the very quick question, you were saying here and now and, trying to get the salvation, why wait, till you go to heaven or whatever else. And then Devi said, look, this is something to do with, the mind and the state of the mind. So I'm a little confused about what now.
So I would say, I don't know if Devi wants to add, but I would say that when they say now, it's a state of the mind. where you are trying to move past and get into this Sravanam, Mananam and Nididhyasana. That's what I would say. So I think you are in the right state. This is now is good. So you're already in Sravanam. Do the reflection, work with the people who know this, do your Vedantic meditation, and keep progressing as much as we can. That's the best we can do.
Rajiv, you want to say anything?
No, I have nothing to say at this point.
I wanted to say, Rajiv, that video you sent, if you look at it from a purely Advaitic spirit, it makes sense.
Yes.
It's here and now.
Yes, you see, I don't study this deeply. I just read occasionally here and there, and sometimes things agree with me, and sometimes I'm not. I know I'm not smart enough to figure it out. That's been my life.
Yeah, that's probably true of all of us. No different.
Thanks, Rajiv. I think, Subra, you want to conclude?
No, I would say in general, if anybody is interested, I'll post that Anand Sharma's classes. If anyone wants to join, you can join. If you don't want to join, find something else, fine. But Sarva Priyananda, I strongly urge you to. He has a lot of general talks, he'll talk about Buddhism or some other religion, all those kinds of comparative religions and all. It's very interesting to listen to, even if you're not, right now saying, oh, I want to explore Advaita, but I just want to listen to some general stuff. He's a good guy to listen to. In fact, I would say for a very big high-level overview of, Hinduism and Advaita and Shaivism and all that stuff, there's a talk called Buddha at the Gas Pump by him. You should listen to that. It's very interesting. It's meant for lay audience. Buddha at the Gas Pump, Sarva Priyananda. Okay. I really appreciate your interest.
Thank you, GK.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.